we proceed to work on our application and introduce Riverpod, we have to look at the theory of Riverpod and how we can use code generator in our Riverpod before we start just working on it. So first we have to define what is Riverpod. So Riverpod, for all of us, we just say Riverpod is a state management tool, and that's it. But by definition, Riverpod is a framework for Flutter and Dart that lets us manage requests, including network requests, in a reactive and caching way. It can handle errors and refresh data automatically by combining and recalculating requests. So that's the definition of Riverpod. So let's move on to code generation. So code generation works hand in hand with a build runner and allows automatic generation of provider based on annotations in your Flutter applications. By using @Riverpod annotations, we can instruct the generator to create Riverpod definitions for classes and methods. So these are just definitions, but as we go on, we will see how they work like in a real life application. So to set up our application for Riverpod, we need some dependencies. So the first dependence that we need Riverpod, but we have alternatives. We have Riverpod itself, Flutter Riverpod, and we have Hooks Riverpod. You can pick either one of the three and still produce the same results. The next package that we need a Riverpod annotation. So annotation is the one that allows us to generate code. It enables us to generate code automatically as it works hand in hand with Riverpod generator. So let's move on to our dev dependencies. So we need a couple of dev dependencies. The first one is build runner. So this is a tool used in Dart to generate the code. And down here, we have Riverpod generator. And this is the code generator for Riverpod in our application so that we can go on and generate some providers for us. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We are going to set up 4 packages in our application and go on to use code generation. So let's move on. So here, when we are working with code generations, there are some steps that we should take. So the first one is when we create a new file. In order for us to generate code, we should include this line of code in our file, just below the inputs. So here we have this input like Riverpod annotation, and we need this part code riverpod.g.dart. So here the name can be anything, but this name has to be the same as our file name, the file that we are working in. For example, here, this is the name of the file that we are looking at right now. So we take this name, we put it first, then we put .g and then dart. That's how we put names. The name doesn't have to be different. So we have to put the name which is the same as our file name, and then we add .g.dart. So this line is important. Keep that in mind. So let's move on. So here this is an example of a Dart class, not a Dart class, a Riverpod class that we are going to use to generate the code. So at first we need our annotation. So this is the @Riverpod annotation. This annotation is put at the beginning of each and every class that we want to generate code for. So this is the first thing that we need to do at Riverpod, and then we write our class below. So if we exclude this line of code from our class, the builder won't be able to generate code for us because it's not recognized. So it's important for us to include Riverpod annotation on each and every class that we want to generate code from. So let's move on. Next, we want to look at our class, how it is constructed. So this line of code that we have here, defines a new class with the name code state. That's the name of the class, and it extends $$ code state. So here we have this prefix right here. This prefix indicates that this code state is a generated class. The generated class will include necessary functionalities to manage the state and update it. We update it using Riverpod state management. So that's all about it. So when we are creating a class for our Riverpod classes, we should include, if we are extending, we create our class here and it should extend something like this. It should start with this $$ and then we put our class name here. Okay, so let's move on. So in here we have the its overwrite annotation. This indicates that the following method, which is string build method, overrides a method from the superclass. So let's move on. So down here we have a method with the name setStart, and it takes a string with the new state. So in here we are setting the state of this class to the new state. So we use this method to set new state to our class here. So let's say a state to our string. So here we are returning an empty string, right? So if you want to set a value to it, we are going to use this. We're going to use this method here, setStart, and then we can set new state. So after this is complete, this is more of like, it's a functional Riverpod class. It should be able to generate code because it doesn't have any errors or sound. So it should be able to generate the code. After the code has been generated, we will have two files. But take note, before the code has been generated, this part is going to be showing an error. This part is going to be showing an error. So the error can only go away if the class has been generated successfully. That's when the error will go away. So don't worry yourself if you run into an error and it's not going away. Once your code has been successfully generated, then the error will disappear. So let's move on. After our code has been generated successfully, we will have two files. So initially we were working in this file. So if you are done creating our class and everything checks out, and build runner is running on our application, it picks up the changes, generate the code, we will have another file, and it will have a different icon as compared to our initial file. So this will be the file code provider.g.dart. It will come with the same name that we've provided to it in part, like when we were writing the class. So if we open this file, the orange file, we'll get something like this. This is what the generated code looks like. So the first thing that we have to look at is the name of our provider, because we didn't provide the name. We just provided the class. We didn't provide the name. So the name of our provider is generated for us. So if we want to use the provider, we have to know the name of the provider. So we can open the file and look for the name. So the name will be on top. So this is our name. Code state provider, that's the name. So in most cases, not in most cases, the way it's structured, it will take the class name, put the lowercase on our first letter, and add provider in front of our class name. That will be the name of the class of our provider. And down here, we have the type of the provider that we are going to be, that was generated. So the name of the provider that was generated is auto-dispose notifier provider. So this is the type of the provider that Riverpod has generated for us. Yeah, and all these lines of code, they're not that important. And we come down here, we have type definition. So the type definition is going to be auto dispose notifier, and here it's a string. So we were working with the string. We are working with the string. So our type definition here is going to be a string for this generated class. So that's all for code generation. Once our code has been successfully generated, we need to access our providers. And to do that, we need to go to our main.dart. In our main.dart, we need to wrap my app with a scope, is the provider scope. So provider scope is a widget. The provider scope widget is the root of the widget tree and is used to provide the scope for provider Riverpods, meaning that any provider that are used in the widget tree that's in our application, to make it simple, any widget can be able to access our providers in our application if we wrap my app in provider scope. That's the definition in human language. In human language, in a simple way, I can say, in a simple way. So if we wrap my app in a provider scope, every widget that comes under, that is in our application, can be able to access any provider that we are going to create in our application. So we now need to look at how we can access our providers in our application. So there are several ways that we can access our providers. The first one to begin with is a consumer widget. And the next one is the first one is a consumer. The second is a consumer widget, which is the one that we are going to look at in this example. And in our application, when we are working on our application, we are going to explore different ways on how to access providers, and like depending on the use case. So we're going to take a look at how we can access them and how we can use them. And we have a consumer stateful widget also. It can be used to access providers. So let's take a look at our example. Since we are going to use consumer widget to access our provider here, our class is a test page. It's a named test page, and it extends consumer widget instead of a stateless widget. So it's a consumer widget. So in here, in our widget build, we have build context, and it requires context, and we have this additional value here, which is widget ref, and it requires widget ref. So we're going to be using this widget ref to access our providers. For instance, in here, we want to access the value of our provider, the one that we just created in this example. And we need to be looking out for changes. So for us to be looking for changes, we need to use ref.watch, and we watch our provider. This is the name of our provider here, code state provider, and we put them in this variable. So this variable, we can use var, but we know the type of the variable. So the type of the variable, it's a string. So you can either use a var, or you can just go direct and just use string. But best practices is just to use a string, because you know it's a string. So this will be reading our string. So this is our string. We can be able to display our string in our UI. So here we have a scaffold, center, column, and first we have a text button. We have a text button, and next we have a text widget down here. So in our text widget, we can display the name of, we can display our string. So we can have a text, and we can have our string in here. And to make changes, let's say to access methods that we put in our provider class, in our class, we have to include this dot notifier. Without this dot notifier, we cannot access the contents of, we cannot access the methods which are included in our provider class. So here we need to access this set start method so that we can set a new value to our string, which is in our provider. So here we use ref.read. This is the name of our provider, and we put dot notifier and dot set start. We call our method. Our method requires a string, so we provide a string in here. And if we click and submit, right? If we just click and submit, since we are watching here, these changes are going to be pushed to this code here, and our widget is going to rebuild, and the text here that is shown is going to be different from the initial text. So initially it was an empty text, so nothing will be showing here, but once we set this text, it will appear in our UI automatically. So that's all about it when it comes to the theory of provider. So now we are going to go into our application, and we are going to follow the steps that we introduced in our theory section. and try to replicate this test project in our application, then we can go on to create our own providers that we want to use